I'm Gabrielle Hoyt, the literary manager of Roundhouse Theater, and I'm hosting the weekly series Playwrights on Plays, which is part of the Roundhouse at Your House digital programming, fully funded by new contributions from the Roundhouse Board of Trustees. Every Thursday at 7 p.m., I'll spend an hour interviewing a different Roundhouse-affiliated theater maker about their work, their career, and a play that has influenced, inspired, or moved them in some way. We'll also include time in those interviews for your questions, which, if you're watching live, you can type into the chat window on your screen. Each play we discuss is already free online for you to experience, so that you can continue to engage with theater from your home throughout the week. Tonight, I'm so happy to be speaking to Roundhouse Theater commissioned playwright Mfoniso Udofia. Playwright, screenwriter, and actor, she is best known for her celebrated Ufot cycle, a sequence of 9 plays chronicling the lives of a Nigerian-American family over multiple generations. Her work has appeared at acclaimed theaters throughout the country, including New York Theater Workshop, the American Conservatory Theater, and the Playwrights Realm. And she's the recipient of the 2017 Helen Merrill Playwright Award, the 2017-2018 McKnight National Residency and Commission at the Playwright Center, and a member of the New Dramatists class of 2023. In addition to her work at Roundhouse, she has commissions with institutions including Hartford Stage, Denver Center for the Arts, and South Coast Repertory. She's been featured in the New York Times, Playbill, and American Theater, and I'm so very excited to have her with us to discuss her life, her work, and Shakespeare's Othello. Welcome, Mfoniso.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, I'm just so thrilled to be with you tonight. I got to say, getting to work together has really been one of the highlights of my year. So I'm so excited to share a little bit of your work and your thoughts with our virtual audience.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. Yeah, for asking me to be here tonight.
Yeah. So as I mentioned when we spoke before, the question, how are you, is a little bit too fraught for artists and for everyone right now. But I would love to get a sense of what your life is like right now. You're not in New York, you're in LA.
I am not in New York. I am in LA. I am about to come back to New York in a couple of weeks, which is going to be wonderful because I've been away from New York for close to 5 months now. I've been in LA and I've been working on a TV show that's very near and dear to my heart called Little America, which is going to be on Apple TV. And so it's lovely. I was on with them for season 1, so it's really good to be back again for season 2. And we've just wrapped, and it tells like really heartwarming yet still nuanced immigrant stories.
Wow. So when should we be looking for that?
Well, you can definitely go on Apple TV. I think it might be, I hope this is true. I think it might be free right now, Apple TV, like to watch this show. You could watch season 1 of Little America on Apple TV now. But as for season 2, with everything that's going on in the world and production, I could not tell you anything. Everything is up in the air.
I think we're all in the mood for heartwarming, beautiful stories at the moment. So I personally will be taking a look. And so that is what you were working on when social distancing began. Were you working on any theater as well?
No, at the time I wasn't. It's what happened was, I think my New York Theater Workshop plays. I did Run Boy Run and In Old Age. I have cheesecloth for brain right now, so excuse me as I like close my eyes in order to remember because that's where I'm at. But I like wrapped up those 2 shows with New York Theater Workshop, and those 2 plays are part of my 9-play cycle. And it's like I wrapped that up. I did a little project on a Lena Horne musical for a week or 2 after that, and then boom, came to LA. And when I was in LA, I wasn't working on theater while working. So I wrapped up theater and then boom, into another medium.
Gotcha. And so did your writers' room go virtual? Have you been still collaborating and working this past couple months?
Yeah, it went virtual for a little bit, but Little America is a different kind of show. I have some TV writer friends who were Zooming like 8 hours a day. That's not what happened with me, which I'm kind of thankful for because that's a lot of screen time. But Little America is an anthology. So that means breaking and creating on a show like Little America is quite different. You can section off and give people different kinds of work. So when the shelter in place orders came down,
Mhm.
we just got to like split up in teams and break story on our own, and then have one-on-one conversations with the showrunners, see if we were on track. And then after that, we all got our episode and we did our outlines and wrote on our own, especially since our episodes are not dependent on anybody else.
Right. I see. Wow. That sounds so that sounds like actually a really beautiful artistic experience to have during gestures, all this.
It is. I also realize that it's like breaking a pilot every time.
Mhm.
And that can be difficult too. So like usually like the first entree into a show is the most difficult, and also like has to have a lot of art and exposition, and you're doing that 8 different times.
Wow.
So it's good in one way, and then in another way it can be breaking your brain as you're like, okay, I'm out of this world, create a whole new world, go.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So you're now kind of transitioning out of Little America world. You're leaving LA. You're coming back to New York. Is it your intent to? Something that's been interesting has been the different ways that some artists are viewing this as a hiatus almost, whereas some are really seeing this as a very fertile time.
Mhm.
Is it your intent to begin working on new plays when you return to New York?
Ooh, I need to be careful with how I answer this question. Especially as I do have like commissions hanging out there.
Mhm.
Um, I do think I do think I do need a rest. I
Yeah.
think um, there's always a pressure to work. There's always work to be done. And the thing with like TV and film is you can't stop the deadline. You can't stop. And so for me right now, I am looking forward to 2 to 3 weeks where I can actually sit down, be with myself, kind of decompress and really go, okay, what artistically wants to come out of me? How does this belong in my commissioned work? Um, what is the art that I want to tell right now, which I think does have a lot more to do with probably Black joy, Black, yeah, like really centering and focusing what I, Mfoniso, want to say. And
Mhm.
before you do that, you might need a little rest. So I might take my 2 weeks to rest.
I think you deserve more than 2 weeks of rest. One thing and even just hearing what your past year has been like, it's I've been talking to so many different, very successful and accomplished, but freelance artists,
Mhm.
and the pace at which everyone was going was perhaps unsustainable, or at least
Yeah.
feels unsustainable now. And this moment of uh, pause
Yeah.
has been interesting.
Yeah, it can be a reminder of your humanity and a reminder to take care of the vessel that is creating the art. I also don't want to negate the fact that I am extraordinarily privileged to be able to have work in a certain kind of way, because people very close to me, like who are not also working in multiple mediums, like this is a really difficult time. One where the thought of rest is running like right next to impending like real kind, like not doom, but like real worry and anxiety as you go, this is unsustainable to not have work. So I don't know, I'm interested in things that we all can do now to take care of ourselves, our minds, our bodies, our hearts as best as we can in this very odd time.
It sounds too like the kind of art that you're talking about having an urge to create as part of that caretaking.
Yeah. Mhm.
So on that subject of art, and specifically your art, I do want to make sure that we give those who haven't been lucky enough yet to see one of your plays, although hopefully soon in the future at Roundhouse that will change,
Mhm.
to get a sense of you as an artist. And of course, you're most known for your ambitious,
Mhm.
swooping, beautiful 9 play cycle. And but I'm curious how you would characterize your writing and the kind of art that you put out into the world?
It's, yeah, I'm in the middle of a 9-play cycle, and the plays are, I think, poetic and dense, and also have real shades of sharpness and shadow as you're looking at like the unexcavated parts of the human condition. So I'm in the middle of writing 9 plays, of which 6 of them are finished. And I am specifically looking at Nigerians who came into the country in the 1970s. These are the sojourners coming in, and they had no intention of staying inside the country. They wanted to get an education, perhaps the best parts of Western culture, and then leave the parts that did not suit them, and then go and rebuild their own country. And Nigeria fell apart. And so I'm taking a look at these people specifically because I don't know that we handle like Africans in theater with a lot of nuance sometimes, especially not when I was writing. I didn't see it, and I don't know sometimes if this is just that it wasn't there, or it just wasn't, I wasn't able to see it on the stages, American stages, the way I wanted to see it. So I started writing, and I'm following one family over the course of what is now 3 generations. And I am looking at what it means to be an African building within America, what it means for the children who are African American and might not have the same sort of historical relationship to Blackness that people who have been here since the transatlantic slave days do. And then after that, at the end, really looking at what is Black joy, what is Black healing, and what is a unification between African and African Americans, and like healing the diaspora, the African diaspora. So that's what I intend to do. I have 3 more plays to write to wrap this up. It is ambitious. Sometimes I look back at like when I decided to say it's going to be 9 plays, and I just shake my head at myself going, and you had to say that out loud to somebody who was like going to write something in the press. So, but yeah, that's a little bit about me and my work.
And I will say this has been so successful that all 3 of those unwritten plays, right, are already spoken for. I mean, they are, this has been truly, not just a mammoth task for yourself, but I mean, a mammoth achievement in terms of the influence it's already had in American theater. I think, but I'm biased because you're one of my favorite playwrights.
Thank you.
So I want to just talk a little more, just so that folks get a sense of the artistic scope of this project as well. Something you said when I first met you that amazed me was that you also set yourself a different kind of formal and stylistic goal with each play. You attempt for each one to fit a different genre or a different kind of theater, from Run Boy Run, which is kind of a memory and a ghost play, to In Old Age, which is kind of magical realism, perhaps, to Sojourners, which is this kind of amazing family drama. So I'd love, did you set out also knowing that you were going to set yourself this additional challenge, and what is your reason for doing so? Surely writing 9 plays with the intent that you had was enough.
Yeah, I actually did set out with that in my mind.
Amazing.
Also because I didn't want to write the same way every way over the course of many, many plays. For me as an artist, it gets a little tight to do so. So, and I also wanted to see if I could make a play that had Africans at the center, that was within different like genre milieux. So like if I could have myself a little kitchen sink play that had Africans in the heart of it, and that's Her Portmanteau, where it's basically one setting. You're going to trap them in a room and let them throw down, which is a classic American theater standard. So I wanted to have one of those. I wanted to have plays that were like built on more African structures, also to push what the American theater could be, which is how you take a look at like something like a Run Boy Run, which is a memory play, but is built it's built disrupting the time continuum in a way that's really, if you're not patient and steady, can be like, where am I? Who am I? Who are these people? When is she going to tell me what it is I'm seeing?
Mhm.
It was important for me to experience and try my hand at different modalities of writing. Um, and also good for, I think, the plays themselves, because I can get my big Greek style chorus play in like the Grove. And if a theater can't like tackle having 30 people on a stage, which I get it, might be difficult, then you can take a look at the kitchen sink play, Her Portmanteau, and that one is highly producible. So there are different kinds and styles for many different reasons.
And then at the same time, even as, this is a sweep of now, from the 70s, nearly 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
3 generations, as you said, but there is this incredibly intimate personal core of this one family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, did you make a decision, are these plays, or I'm not saying it right, but how intimate have these plays gotten for you, or how personal?
The plays themselves, they do start with a core of something personal, and it could be the question itself. Like for a play like Sojourners, which has become the origin point of the cycle, the question is, can the Nigerian dream work within an American paradigm? That's the question. And the reason why that question is so personal to me is because I do have family members who came here without an intention of staying here. So what does that mean when you had all these hopes for your country, all these hopes for yourself, and then all of a sudden you're locked in a land that you had no dreamings of being within? I'm asking myself questions to help me understand some of the people around me, to help me understand even myself. And when it's like, because I think at the heart of the question is also like, is this autobiographical, or like where or how does my Mfoniso's like realistic life live in here? Because it can feel so personal. What happens is I do have like titans in my life, and they're composite, like I composite being some of the like these people. I've always said like I take a nose from over here, and then I'll take a finger from an aunt, and then the hair follicles of my mom, and maybe the gap tooth of all of the women in my line, and I will make that woman. So yeah, it's very, very personal, but I wouldn't say autobiographical, and also really important. The questions at the heart of the plays themselves are very important for me.
Mm-hmm. So another question that I have, and it's related a bit to our current moment. It really did and does feel that you're kind of at the vanguard of a new type of American theater that is broader in terms of the stories that American theater will tell, and also deeply ambitious in terms of the form that those stories will take. A 9-play cycle that often dispenses with realism, that tells the stories of Nigerian and Nigerian American and then African American folks. And I'm curious, do you feel like do you have a sense of how American theater can preserve that movement towards a more broad and more exciting and more interesting form, as at the same time we're kind of in the midst of this financial and logistical crisis? That's not a question you can answer.
Woo, I'm like sitting here going, funny. So how do you begin to answer that?
I don't know, but I think a lot these days about that. Plays like yours are why I'm excited about American theater, and I'm just starting to think about how we can continue to be that exciting as institutions start looking towards what feels safe.
I do think that it is the theaters that have produced me and are commissioning me were daring even then. Like they were like to do one of my plays is difficult, in that you're going to have to get a dialect coach. You're going to have to get a language, an actual native speaker, because certain of these plays are like an eighth to a quarter in a vernacular African language, which none of us are even used to. Like even if you think, like, have you actually heard somebody from the continent speak in their native tongue? A lot of people might not have even done that. So then I'm asking you to learn it and learn it well enough to act within it. So like, I know that I come with a lot of expense, time. The actors who do my stuff need a lot of support. So I was potentially difficult and tricky to produce and commission in safe times. And now we are in the time of a pandemic and COVID. And I do think about what it would mean to produce me, knowing what the barriers to production might be. And I do think I kind of place that right back on the institution, as opposed to on the artist to figure out what it is to continuously dare when, in a time like this, going back to what is safe is going to feel prudent. When I don't know that unsafe times or dangerous times like this one should call for safe art. So I don't know the way. I just know what the impulse is. And the impulse will be to do, and we're about to talk about it now. The impulse is going to be to do more Shakespeare. Is going to like go back into like this public domain canon. And I'm not saying not to. I am saying that you do need to remain rigorous about who the new is, and that's not just me. Like, who else is out there right now finding them, shaping them, and doing your mightiest to give the support, because it's that important. I don't know a better way.
I mean, that's as good as I've heard. So thank you so much. So we're going to turn from some difficult topics to a difficult play.
Yeah.
You have chosen, you would like to discuss Othello by William Shakespeare, a play that you whatever the word is, adapted, translated, whatever we would like to call it, for Oregon Shakespeare Festival's Play On program, and a play about which you have very conflicted feelings, as you told me earlier today when we spoke on the phone. So just to begin kind of a grounding point for our conversation going forward, I would love to hear a little bit in more depth about those feelings and about their sources, especially given that you know this play quite intimately, having worked on it extensively.
Right. And I, full disclosure, was about to call and go, I don't want to talk about this today. Because of what's happening out in the world. And I also do have a lot of issues with the play Othello. And I guess one of the questions that might also be inside there is also like, why this play, if I'm also like so conflicted in and around it? This was one of the first Shakespeare plays that I ever encountered. I believe I was in 10th grade. And in 10th grade, I was not ready to like understand. I wasn't yet able to have nuanced, this is just me, I'm not saying other people at this time weren't able to. I wasn't able to have nuanced, complex conversations in and around race at that time. So when I read it, it was a love story. And so when Louis, with Play On, Louis Douthit, approached me and was like, I want you to be part of this project that translates all of the plays, all of Shakespeare's plays. I was like, yes, I'll do Othello. I had not read Othello from 10th grade me to the me that Louis was talking to, right? So I just remember tragic love and teenage angst as I was putting myself in I was doing whatever I was doing that made me understand the play at the level and the age that I was at. Then I reread it again with the explicit direction to translate it into modern English. I read it and I approached something quite close to loathing the play. And when I was asked to choose a play, I think I was like interested in, I was interested in exploring this play because it's the one in the public domain that's been freshest, because when I've been translating it, it's like right in front of mind. And also to talk in and around what Othello is. And then I called you today to say I didn't want to do it because of what's happening out in the world right now today. And it further complicates for me where and how Othello exists in and how we are staging and producing this play. So some of my complications in and around it are definitely about the construction of Othello himself. When I got there in translation, he didn't feel very 3D to me. Iago felt very 3D. It's very difficult to look at whatever the animal imagery is. It is very difficult to see how like rhetorical devices of repetition are like working so insidiously and quickly on what was supposed to be a very smart human being. It is difficult to fathom what is frothing at the mouth and like epileptic fits. And I got angry. I started to question as I was translating it if this was actually more of a manual of dispossession than it was like a story on a tragic love affair. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
So a lot there, but I think where I'd like to start is because when we were discussing earlier today, you know, whether we wanted to discuss this play or not, something that you mentioned in passing, but that I'd like to return to, you know, this play is done hundreds of times a year, whether it's in high schools or professional theaters. It's also read by probably thousands of students a year, and something you said was that you think perhaps those things shouldn't happen without a rigorous intellectual framework around them. So I'm wondering if you can discuss that a little bit more and what that framework looks like for you.
I don't know all the ins and outs of what the framework looks like, but I do know that it is an issue for us to be teaching this story at really young ages. Like I told you, I think this story hit me when I was in 10th grade. My brain is still forming. I'm not sure that I had a facility in and around very complicated social constructs. And so to give this play in formative years, it without really the ability to deconstruct it, I don't know what the word for it is. I guess my mind went first to an insulting or a pain. It's a bruising, and so some of those, if we can't actually have conversations in and around oppression, I'm not certain why we're doing Othello.
Yeah, and then it also occurs to me that you know, and we had I had mentioned as well that I've heard opinions from Black actors who have been asked to play the role. Some of them play the role many times because it is considered one of the great roles in the canon, that it is, as you said, bruising and in fact damaging, even to say those words and play that part night after night.
Right. I mean, when the actor in me turned on while translating, and it was, you know, there are those moments a writer writes where you have to leap. Like you've got to fill in the emotional gap in order to get from point A to point B. Othello is leaping around quite a lot. He goes from somebody who is quite solid as a human, feels as if there is a knowledge of worth, will take on Brabantio, will declare how and why he loved Desdemona in not, I mean, the closest thing to poetics for a military man, you know? And then it is very quickly for me that he ends up in something that looks like insanity. And so to make that jump as an actor, I find that's difficult. You got to do a lot of filling in ways that I didn't experience when I was trying to slam my body into other characters. So I also yeah, they're just the how do I say it? The kinds of problems also of gaze and I'm trying to figure out the right words to say. It feels almost a little bit like he's being written about as opposed to being. And then at the end of it, the place where he's being the most is when he's frothing at the mouth and killing. And so it's very, I think it's a lot to ask an actor to do, to make those kinds of leaps and then to leap into like a bitter vat of emotional excess that then turns dangerous. That's me.
I also, because I've been thinking about this as you speak now and as we speak earlier, that it does feel like, given the place of Shakespeare within our culture now and for hundreds of years, there's an impulse to think the best of him. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Othello regarding, his depiction of race, or Merchant of Venice and his depiction of religion, Taming of the Shrew and his depiction of virulent and violent misogyny. Yes. And there does feel like there's a constant impulse both within scholars and then in directors and productions to find ways that the plays come off in a good light in the 21st century.
Right. There is. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about translating, is that good light that you're talking about feels, there's something about the poetics. There's something about the way we read Shakespeare now, which has elevated it from the base course that I think it was. And so I don't know if we are also really understanding everything that we're reading when we're reading with today's eye, which is why that translation process was so interesting. As you go, oh, like throughout the play, right? You're using the word more. We don't really use that word anymore. But that word is so elastic. It could be a descriptor. It could be something that connotes something that's not Christian, a different religion. It could be a slur, depending on how you use it. So when we read, we're just reading more without actually embedding meaning. And so if you're going to read Othello, then we need to have conversations in and around what is actually being said and really living within it. And I know that the race paradigms of back then are not the same as now, but the systems and tools of oppression are shockingly similar. And so when we read it, we need to read it without the poetics attached to it so hard.
So to go a step further, and I think to fully unpack what we're kind of implying about the play, would we, do you think in this conversation, go so far as to say that the play Othello is itself a tool of oppression?
I mean, I started saying when I was translating, this is a manual of dispossession. This is a great way. I don't know who this Othello is. I haven't actually met this Othello in my real life. I'm not certain um, fully that I understand where Othello's humanity is. I'm not certain even that I think that this is a full 3D character, y'all. I do think some of the people around him are. And when you start like lifting it out and translating it and seeing how Iago is behaving and corrupting the world, is a true agent of chaos to and of his own end, and has no regrets and or feelings in and around killing something that is 2D. It's almost like Iago made him the construction and then killed him. I am saying that it is, in its own way, a tool of oppression. And if you are going to do it, you need to, I do think we need to start having conversations in and around what we are asking our actors of color to do for our entertainment, and then calling it a love story and beautiful. And I think we need to have real education if you're going to do this play in and around the tools of oppression.
So we've mentioned Iago a couple times in Desdemona, and I want to make sure that we also address those characters through this lens. In that, to start, and Othello, his wife Desdemona, Iago, the man who betrays and maddens and down the path of destruction. Iago, I'd love to start with Iago in that, just historically, even amongst the canon of Shakespearean villains, Iago has been held up as this kind of this obsession.
Yeah.
Almost. Coleridge famously calls him motiveless malignity.
Yeah.
Because he's just pure evil, as you said, pure chaos. And I think what I hear you saying is that the writing actually renders him more of a person,
yes,
than Othello. And I'm wondering, do you see kind of part of the historical obsession with Iago as stemming from that?
I do. I listen, I think we're also, as humans, like delighted by boogers and want to keep looking at them. So there is a way in which Iago behaves that we just want to keep looking at. But he's also given magnificent text and twirls and flourishes, and there's something about the way he's written that is written with a kind of almost glee for me. Like when I'm translating it, like it feels playful in its destructiveness.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, you're making me think a little bit about Richard III, a similarly kind of fully embodied and gleeful villain. But of course, and I'm literally just thinking on my feet here, but in Richard III, Shakespeare is telling he is in no way touching the question of race, and therefore Richard III's own malignity has very different meanings within that context. And so you'd also said earlier, you were originally really attracted to this beautiful love story between Othello and Desdemona, and of course, as the play opens, these two lovers have come together despite Desdemona's father's displeasure, and what Desdemona says is she fell in love with Othello's story, with the fact that he was an enslaved person and then had all these adventures and ended up a high-ranking general, and it sounded as if there are actually hidden as you call them, tools of dispossession and oppression within that relationship as well.
Within that relationship itself, exactly.
Yeah.
When I was, what is 10th grade, 16, 17 years old?
Around there, yeah.
I also don't know what love is. I'm like hoping that, I don't know, Bobby will love me from around the corner. I'm like imagining it, And so now as an older person reading it, going, there's a lot of the exotic in here. There's a lot of fetish. I can never say this well. My lisp gets in the way. Like a fetishization. Ooh, I did it today.
That was beautiful. Rolled off the tongue.
There are things in here that do not make this, I think, a fully realized love anything. I think that there are maybe other words for what this is. I do think there's quite a lot of the carnal lust. I do think there might be a certain kind of like a cultural escapism that's happening. I think it might be like let me free myself off the yoke of my father. And like I feel the woman's pain in it too, of like, I'm leaving one prison into another. This one looks better. Let me go. The prison of my own household into a prison of marriage. So it's not a Desdemona I actually do have feelings for, but I wouldn't call it love when I look at it today. And I have had quite a few like intellectual fights on no, she loved him, he loved her. And I'm like, I think, and this is just me personally stepping outside of Shakespeare, like part of what makes love is a unified like decision on how we are going to operate together. They didn't have that. They didn't, I don't know that they actually had conversations on what this world would look like when they came together. And maybe that's too much to ask. But I then just push back and go, what are you calling love? That's not love. That is very easy to split apart. And so, yeah, it's no longer for me like a tragic love affair as much as it is a tragic loss of life within like the hotbeds of different kinds and stages of lusts.
And so kind of to not sum up necessarily, but to bring all these different threads together, what I think I hear you saying, or what I'm kind of taking from all of this, is that this text, that it's very easy for a theater to produce this text and for audiences, predominantly white audiences, to go and to leave feeling really good.
Right.
Like the classic says that racism is bad.
Yes.
There is a noble figure of this Black general at the center. They're the white villain. And what I hear from this conversation, that actually there are insidious forces at work underneath that easy storyline that in fact reinforce racism.
We're not dismantling a system in Othello. We're not dismantling the system of oppression. We're actually creating and codifying it. And we might get stuck in the trap of a love affair without interrogating what system was just made today. Who is alive at the end of the play? Who has been able to maintain their dignity? The women are gone. The Black man has been rendered bestial. And even Iago, in all of his vileness, stays standing. He is mute and stays standing. And I don't know that we are interrogating exactly what we just built from beginning to end in this play. And I do think it is in this time period when we're seeing what we're seeing outside as like people of color can't walk down a street because of systems that have been built. I do think it is a disaster for us to not look back at our canon and ask ourselves really rigorously, what is the system that has been built here? Why are we telling this story now? Why are we asking our actors to do this story now? And exactly what do we hope our audiences are taking away? Because there are subliminal messages within a piece of theater. And it is our job, I think, as artists, as institutions, to question what those are.
Yeah, I mean, I've some. I mean, I could talk with you about this for multiple weeks, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, more than anything, I also just want to acknowledge and thank you for the immense generosity that you're showing during this discussion of something bruising, as you said, and incredibly difficult and painful. I want to. I guess I'm curious. Do you feel that there are works that we would consider classic that are in some way subversive, that are not simply enforcing uh white supremacist, misogynist, homophobic norms, or do they all?
That's that you almost became bell hooks in the way you were like listing out the
I could keep going. I could keep going.
I at this moment don't know if I know how to answer that. I would need to go back with my non-cheesecloth brain and really think if I think that there are some. I mean, the ones that I know are definitely from an African canon. You know, we're like I think Bernard bin Lindadie is amazing. I'm forgetting where he's coming from, but he is taking on things today. I mean, things back in colonial days that like kind of make at least shed light on the institution that's being made, and then nod at what it is to topple it for a second. But I want to take that question and actually think harder about what I think from that these time periods actually is working subversively. And I know that there are some. I just have cheesecloth for brain.
I think it's kind of a deceptively simple question, right? Because so often theater, even theater that seems progressive, is in fact reinforcing the very norms that it claims to be working against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I mean, and it what it at the bare minimum, it's conversation. Really clear conversation in and around this play that isn't um, yoked to like a Shakespeare, like a purism or a leaning into the poetics, like a really, I don't know that we know what we're reading. So even just starting with a conversation.
And actually, that is kind of where I want to wind down this part of our conversation before we turn to questions. Is for those who are now feeling like, wow, I got to go reread this play to understand what it is that that you've highlighted here.
Mhm.
What do you? Are there some useful lenses or some core questions through which one can begin to experience this play responsibly?
Yeah. I mean, Spark Notes is not going to do it. Or what is that called? No Fear Shakespeare. It's not going to do it. But what you have to do, I think, is line by line, when you do not know a word, and this is a tedious thing, to go and get that definition. And then beyond the definition, task yourself for figuring out how that word was used. And it is a lot of work. And I definitely worked with some dramaturgs to help me with this. But you do have to like unpack the word itself, because words are not operating the same way as they are for us today. And I did start, and I mean, I feel like I can give you a list later because I don't have it in front of me, but I did do also a lot of research in and around the play after I did my work with words. I went on JSTOR, which for now I think is offering free articles. And like, I do love um, doing a certain kind of research in and around the play. And if you type in Othello and race and just start taking a look at how people on JSTOR, like academics and scholars and practitioners, talk about what it is to be within that play, it'll help you also start seeing beyond the beauty of the words, and start kind of breaking your fidelity to Shakespeare as like icon, which then helps you not interrogate him. So that's where I started, and it led me down a path of refining my thought in and around this play.
It occurs to me actually, again, largely thinking on my feet because this has been such a deeply moving and thought-provoking conversation, that it feels to me that perhaps productions and not perhaps it is productions and scholarship around Othello say much more. In fact, are entirely about white critics and directors and theatrical institutions' interpretations of race at that given moment than about the character of Othello and the reality of him as a Black person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or and then I mean, I don't know, and that's another thing which makes this play fun to do if you are doing the work of it. Because like then you start getting into conversations on like Black person, definitely person of color, definitely other person. But I don't know if it's Black person the way we think of Black today. That's not technically what more is. It could be, but it might not be. And that's like what you'll figure out as you're really within the words of the play. Like this could be maybe this was the first religion he had, thus he's a Moor. He could actually be more Middle Eastern. We don't know. All we know is that he's an other. And that other is killed.
I do want to turn now to some questions from our audience. We've already got a couple here, and I definitely encourage folks to continue sending those in. So we have a question. Homegoing reminds me a lot of your cycle. What can generations across the diaspora learn from sharing lessons, but also traumas?
Iago's Homegoing rocked my world. I love that book so much. And now I'm going to ask you to reread that question because I answered. What
can generations across the diaspora learn from sharing lessons, but also traumas? We got easy questions for you.
We got some easy questions. So I think one of the issues in and around what has happened to people from the African diaspora has a lot to do with memory. And Iago is exceptional at looking at what the healing of potentially holes in memory could be. So just quickly, Iago is telling the story, if I remember it correctly, just so people know what we're talking about. She's telling the story. It's in Ghana. It's at the height of the slave trade. You've got a mother who has got two daughters who will then be separated. One of them is going to take the transatlantic route and end up in America, and the other will stay within Ghana, and you'll watch their lines create and increase over time through some of the hardest times of being African or African American in our history. And then the last two at the ends of the line will then meet each other at a university and be like, I feel like I knew you. So we did all of this separating to then link us back together again. And somehow what Iago is doing, and I think it is an imperfect doing, but I am so happy that she did it, is writing what happened to both peoples and toggling back and forth, kind of giving memory and word to the pain from both angles. So that by the time these two come to look at each other, you're going, oh my God, I hope they see each other. Oh my God, what perfection this is, that we've been able to kind of heal a line again. And so I do think it is quite important for people of the African diaspora, from the continent, and the African American community and all of the diasporas to start like talking to each other, in and around each other, of each other, without necessarily having whiteness at the center, in order for us and our children's children's children to be able to see each other and go, here, pain doesn't have to exist. I don't know if that answers the question, but yes. And when I saw her book, I went, this is something that I'm trying to tackle within my cycle. It completely is. I went, ooh, she did it in narrative and she did it so much more succinctly than me, but yes, I am here for it.
Before we turn to our next question, and again, just listening to you talk, it occurs to me that Othello is is as much as anything an excuse to watch more traumatization of the other on a stage, and that actually the project that you described being called towards at the beginning of our talk of staging Black Joy is in fact far more subversive within the context of the white institution that is American theater.
Yes. Yes. And letting Black Joy just be Black Joy. Letting us be able to have that on a stage without centering any kind of trauma. Like, I sometimes wish for trifles, like for us to have trifle stories. Yeah.
We got a couple more questions in. Another homegoing fan. Are there other works or artists you'd like to shout out for being radical, progressive, joyful, or healing?
I have been reading bell hooks lately, so yeah. I am reading her on love right now. I read the book on masculinities. It has been extraordinarily helpful and healing for me because the work is interconnected. You're not doing work in silo. You can have pain with another, but it is not behoove you to turn around and become that other or become violent, become that way because you were hurt that way. But she doesn't also absolve. It's a fantastic, I'm loving the hooks. And then also, I loved reading Ben Ockery's A Famished Road. And A Famished Road, for me, it's what it does, and I don't know if this is healing, but for me it was. He writes without explanation. And thus, because of that, he knows of whom he's centering. So he's not going to explain what it means to be Nigerian to you. He's just going to drop you down in the middle of the world. And either you're going to connect or you're going to figure out how you bridge the gap. Or either you're going to put the book down, I should say, or figure out how you bridge the gap. And I just found that so revolutionary to just be yourself without explanation. So I love Ben Ockery's work. And I also just finished reading Freshwater. And that one, and looking at, I'm always fascinated about mental illness, what is healing. And I don't know that it gives answers, but what it does is it does steep you inside a very African way of looking, Nigerian way of looking at mental illness in a way that I found very fascinating.
Thank you. And with our 1 minute left, I want to get to this last question. There's been a recent embracing of African narratives by African playwrights. From your experience and what you've seen, what are some things you want theaters to be mindful of as they produce these works?
What I want you to be mindful of is that when you are producing people that have been invisible, sometimes you're going to, you're going to need to check your audiences, find different ways of educating in and around the place. You need to actually start building infrastructure for the newness that you're bringing in, because that newness is going to feel disruptive to the community. I once had someone go like, why don't you make this easier for me? And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. That's not what I'm going to do, you know? And at that moment, the theater rallied around me, and not potentially where their money is coming from. And that is extraordinarily important. Because if you're going to do these playwrights, then you need to support them all the way through it, knowing that what they're doing might feel disruptive to some.
Before we sign off, because we are at the hour, but we did receive a message of solidarity and support that I just want to read to you. Tamika White agrees with everything you're saying about Othello. For someone who directed it some years ago, she challenged her cast to think on every point that you stated. Thank you to you, my sister.
Thank you, Tamika.
Thank you to you. We're gonna say goodnight now, but I'm so deeply moved and grateful for your time, for your openness, and for your brilliance, truly.
Thank you. It was wonderful being here.
Thank you. All right, and thanks to you so very much for tuning in to this episode of Playwrights on Plays. If you would like to read Othello, keeping in mind the many things that we discussed this evening, you can do so online for free at the link that we're providing. The series will continue weekly on Thursdays at 7 p.m., and next we will welcome Lauren Gunderson for yet another Shakespeare, this time Hamlet. Thank you to our tech support, Johnny Monday, our composer, Matt Nielsen, and the Roundhouse Theater Marketing Department. In the meantime, I encourage you to check out Roundhouse's website for additional digital content, especially Homebound, our web series about life in the nation's capital during a pandemic. And if you're financially able, please consider a donation to the Roundhouse Resilience Fund. Your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar by our dedicated and generous Roundhouse Board of Trustees, up to $200,000, meaning that a gift now will impact RHT more than ever before. Be well, take care of yourselves, and I cannot